Hey guys, welcome to Backstage with Millionaires. I'm Caleb, your host, and today we're going to be talking about India's startup ecosystem's latest IPO news, Paytm's NUE, Y Combinator's Indian Winter 2021 startups, Khatabook's latest acquisition, all of the latest funding news, and more coming up right after this. All right, so first up in the news, last week we talked about how Nazara Technologies had gone public, and it looks like now another Indian startup is looking to do the same very, very soon. Zomato is reportedly speeding up its IPO process and could potentially file for IPO as early as next month. From this IPO, they're expected to raise $650 million, that's 4,720 crore rupees, at a valuation of between 7 and $10 billion, that's between 50,000 crore rupees and 72,000 crore rupees. And something that's interesting about this IPO is that if Zomato is able to raise these funds at that valuation of between 7 and $10 billion, then it would become India's most valuable publicly traded food service company. That title is currently held by Jubilant FoodWorks, that's the parent company of Domino's Pizza, and they have a market cap of $5 billion, or 36,000 crore rupees. And here's another interesting fact about this IPO. According to Dipinder Goyal, unlike most IPOs where a lot of early investors take the opportunity to cash out, none of Zomato's investors are looking to exit during this IPO. And the reason for this is that they're expecting Zomato to become a much larger company in the coming years. In fact, Dipinder himself is hoping that Zomato will become a $50 billion company in the next 5 years, which is pretty crazy to think because back in 2020, they saw an 80% drop in their revenue because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And now they're looking to become the first Indian unicorn to go public within a year, and then 5 years down the road becoming a $50 billion company. I mean, this is amazing stuff. So I'm curious to know, are you guys planning on buying stock in Zomato once they go public? Or are you, for some reason, less confident about Zomato's long-term success than their investors are? Let me know in a comment down below. But anyways, in other IPO news, MobiKwik is another Indian startup that's planning on going public very soon. They're expected to draft their IPO prospectus in May, and then they're going to be targeting to go public in September. This initial public offering is going to be happening here in India, and I also forgot to mention earlier that Zomato's will be as well. And from this IPO, MobiKwik is expected to raise between $200 and $250 million. That's between 1,450 and 1,815 crore rupees. Now, there's a lot of unknowns surrounding this MobiKwik IPO, but they might be able to raise these funds at a $1 billion valuation. That's a 7,267 crore rupee valuation. But even before the IPO, they're reportedly planning on raising a pre-IPO round at a valuation of $700 million. That's 5,085 crore rupees. Now, I hope you're not sick of hearing about IPOs because I have one more news item that I wanted to cover. Elevation Capital and Think Investments have launched Think Elevation Capital. This is a special purpose acquisition company that's an SPAC formed with the purpose of taking Indian tech companies public in the United States. This SPAC has onboarded board members like Vijay Shekhar Sharma, the founder and CEO of Paytm, Harsh Jain, co-founder and CEO of Dream11, Neeraj Arora, who was previously WhatsApp's business head, and Kabir Mishra, who used to be a managing partner at SoftBank Group. Now, so far, this SPAC has not found the Indian startup that they're going to be acquiring and taking public in the United States, but I'm pretty sure it's just a matter of time because there's a lot of Indian startups right now that want to go public and they want to do it in the US. All right, next up in the news, in episode 58 of this news show, we talked about new umbrella entities, or NUEs. But just to summarize, NUEs are consortiums of companies that have come together to build digital payment systems for India's fintech space, which would be similar to what we've seen in UPI and RuPay. Now, there's a bunch of companies that are teaming up to form consortiums, and these consortiums are then applying for NUE licenses, and Paytm is one of these companies companies, and now they've got some other companies on board who are joining their consortium. These companies are PolicyBazaar, IndusInd Bank, and Ola Financial. This consortium is called the Foster Payment Network, and it's in the final stages of submitting a bid for an NUE license. Now, I don't know if I'm diving too deeply into this, but I wanted to break down the ownership of this entity, which may end up being an NUE if it's granted a license. Controlling a 50% stake in Foster Payments Network is Vijay Shekhar Sharma himself, Paytm Payments Bank, and Paytm Financial Services. Then you've got PolicyBazaar, IndusInd Bank, and Ola Financial, who are gonna have a non-controlling stake of less than 10%, followed by Centrum Finance, Suryodaya Small Finance Bank, and Think360.ai, which will all be picking up partial stakes. Talking about this potential NUE, Vijay Shekhar Sharma said that there is every kind of representation. Our approach will be extremely inclusive, focused on scaling payments in India. All right, next up in the news, let's talk about Y Combinator's winter 2021 batch, where out of 350 startups, 43 are Indian. That means that out of the 41 nations that are represented in this batch, India is the second largest. And there were a couple of startups that stood out, so I just wanted to list them now. Firstly, we have BetterHalf, which is India's first AI-based matchmaking platform. And a very, very long time ago, we interviewed one of the co-founders of this company, and you can go check that interview out up here. Secondly, we have SplitSub, which is an app that enables you to split your OTT bill with family and friends. And then thirdly, we have Prescribe, which is a startup that's building something similar to Shopify, but for hospitals. If you want to know more about all of the Indian startups in Y Combinator's winter 2021 batch, then there will be a link in the description down below, and we're also going to be including links to everything else that we talk about in this video. All right, next up in the news, Khatabook, which is a startup that enables shopkeepers to manage their businesses digitally, has acquired SaaS-based business management platform Biz Analyst for $10 million. That's 72.6 crore rupees in a mix of equity and cash. With this acquisition, Khatabook will finally be able to monetize its services by adding premium features like business analytics, Salesforce automation, and digital invoicing. During the financial year of 2020, Khatabook saw losses totaling 126 crore rupees, that's $17.3 million, and they already have more than 40 million merchants on their platform. That's 4 crore merchants on their platform. So it definitely seems like now is the right time for them to monetize. All right, moving on to some funding news now. Dream Sports, which is the parent company of fantasy gaming startup Dream11, has raised $400 million, that's 2,905 crore rupees, in a secondary funding round led by TCV, D1 Capital Partners, and Falcon Edge. They're raising these funds at a valuation of around $5 billion, that's 36,280 crore rupees, which is double the valuation that they had when they last raised funds in 2020. Dream11 controls 90% of the fantasy gaming market here in India, which is made all the more impressive by the fact that they're not on the Google Play Store. All right, next up in the funding news, ClearTax, which is a startup that helps individuals and businesses to file their income tax, is in talks to raise $100 million, that's 727 crore rupees, in a funding round led by Tiger Global Management at an expected valuation of between $750 and $850 million. That's between 5,450 crore rupees and 6,176 crore rupees. The startup is expected to use these fresh funds to accelerate growth and build new products. All right, next up in the funding news, digital lending startup KreditBee has raised $75 million, that's 545 crore rupees, in a funding round led by NUE Capital Partners and Motilal Oswal Private Equity. With these funds, they've officially closed their Series C round at $145 million, that's 1,053 crore rupees, and I think it's worth mentioning that the closing of this Series C round marks the complete exit of Chinese investors like Xiaomi, Shunwei Capital, and Kunlun. These Chinese investors previously held a 40% stake in the startup. KreditBee is going to be using these fresh funds to expand into the secured lending business, the insurance business, and also into card-based lending for individuals and businesses. All right, next up in the funding news, industrial goods marketplace Moglix is in talks to raise between $70 and $100 million. That's between 510 and 767 crore rupees in a funding round which would be led by Falcon Edge Capital at an expected valuation of $1 billion, which would make it India's latest unicorn. Moglix is a marketplace where you can buy things like hammer drills, lawnmowers, chainsaws, office stationery, automotive supplies, and medical supplies. All right, next up in the funding news, e-commerce beauty startup Purplle has raised $45 million. That's 327 crore rupees in a funding round led by Sequoia Capital India and Verl Invest at an expected valuation of $300 million. That's 2,180 crore rupees. Thanks to this funding round, one of Purpple's early investors, Ivy Cap Ventures, which had initially invested $2 million, that's 15 crore rupees, has now been able to make a partial exit, raking in $45 million, that's 330 crore rupees, which is a 22x return on their initial investment. All right, next up in the funding news, location-based news sharing and social networking platform Public App, which is owned by short-form news startup InShorts, has raised $41 million, that's 300 crore rupees, in a funding round led by A91 Partners. They've raised these funds at a valuation of $250 billion, that's 1,815 crore rupees, which is double the valuation that they had when they last raised funds 6 months back. Public App is an app where Indian people can go to get news about their specific locality or their city in their language. They already have more than 50 million users, that's 5 crore users, and they'll be using these fresh funds to expand their content offerings, build up their technology infrastructure, and hire new talent. All right, next up in the funding news, Bengaluru-based fintech startup Velocity, which offers credit to online businesses based on their revenues, has raised $10.3 million, that's 75 crore rupees, in a seed funding round led by Valar Ventures. And then the last piece of funding news that I have for you guys this week is that FloBiz, which is a startup that helps offline businesses to digitize their billing and accounting, has raised $10 million, that's 72.6 crore rupees, in its Series A round led by Elevation Capital. All right, that is all the startup news that I have for you guys this week. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please hit the like button. It really helps us out. And if you haven't already subscribed to our channel, we post new videos every single week about Indian startups, entrepreneurs, and the latest news. Also, if you made it this far, but your preferred language is actually Hindi, we make these news videos on a Hindi channel as well. And we also have a podcast, a newsletter, a Discord server, and an Instagram where we post the latest Indian startup news on a very regular basis. Also, as usual, I want to say a big thanks to all of our Backstage with Millionaires members, our unicorns and our decacorns, as well as the people who have been applauding our videos recently. We've been doing this now for more than 2 years, and to see that kind of financial support is really, really validating after all of the hard work that we've put into building this channel. So thanks. All right, thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Backstage with Millionaires, and I will see you in the next one.